Welcome to Homeschooling Journeys. I'm Curious Mike Goldstein, reporting from Boston, and I am here with Andreina Castillo Alemani, and we're going to talk today about her homeschool experience with kids age 8 and 10. Welcome, Andreina.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me.
So, I love your story. You've got a twin sister also homeschooling.
Mhm.
I want to back up a little bit before we get to the homeschooling. You grew up in Venezuela and went to school there, and then you came to the US for college. I'd love you to describe briefly what was your own schooling like back in Venezuela?
So we went to private schools in Venezuela because unfortunately the public education system doesn't really work that well. And it was a small school, two classes per grade. So you ended up knowing everyone, their uncles, their parents, and everything. And we're very academic, but also a Catholic school. So they had the religious aspect of it. But it was, I think, a high demand, but easygoing still in a way.
Rigorous, but they made good personal connections with you.
Yes, yes. And we still had time
Got it.
chance to do our extracurricular activities and sports, dance, and things like that. So,
Got it. So you have this, formative experience.
mhm.
You and your twin come to the US for college. You go to the University of Miami, and you studied what in college in the
I
US?
did my undergrad in psychology, and then I got a master's in marriage and family therapy. So,
Okay, great. So, of all people in the world, you're pretty well positioned to work with an 8 and 10-year-old at home. Um, And I think you told me off air that it was your husband who's kind of a progressive thinker and questions a lot of the business as usual approach to education, who asked about, hey, do we want to potentially consider homeschooling? Just tell us about that. How did this question first get called for you?
so, let me give you a little background on my husband first. He lived in a bunch of different countries, but he went to college here in the States as well. He studied physics and computer science. And he kept saying, he's like, listen, I went to college to study what I wanted to study. I never thought about what I wanted to do, like actually do afterwards. No? And he does very different things. He has his degrees in physics, but job-wise, he has a business and different things. So he says he didn't really apply what he went to college for. I mean, it's like it was a great experience for the social aspect and learning. But he's always been a very curious guy and he's always learning different things on his own. So he's always had the idea that kids also are naturally curious and they want to learn. They don't want to learn and they just give them the time to learn and they'll figure out and find ways. So when my kids went to regular school, and they did pre-K and kindergarten. First, when my oldest son was in kindergarten, that's when COVID hit. And then we were home for a few months, and I was loving that time. I was like doing,
You were loving the homeschool time, so it's like the vibe is good at home
yeah.
with you and the kids, and
Well, I was actually loving
you're
it when before the virtual school started.
exactly. That happened in our home
Yeah.
too. It was like there was this period where nobody knew what was going on, and we were just figuring it out, doing a couple hours together. It was like daddy school in
Oh
our
man.
house, and it was great. And then comes like the virtual school where the school they went to was sort of saying, "Hey, you got to log into Zoom and sit there all day." And
Yeah,
boo, like
exactly.
engagement went way down. What
Mhm.
was what was your experience with
Well, yeah,
that?
the first few months for first it was a slow pace. It was, it was the put on the brakes and we were trying to take a breather, because we also had a lot of extracurricular activities and there were homework and running and doing a lot of things. So at first I was like, oh, this is great. And we're doing experiments at home, art and doing our own thing. Then they finished the school year. They had a little bit of the virtual thing that, I think it was March, the last 2 months. It was very light. But then the next school year came, and then they were expected to log in and do all these, basically the school hour, the school day online. And yeah, that was a lot. That I didn't enjoy a lot. That's why I tell all the parents that tell me now, it's like, oh, we did the homeschooling for a while. And yeah, it doesn't work for us. It's not good. I was like, yeah, it's not the same virtual schooling when you're public school at your house, then you're leading your own pace, I was like, it wasn't
Yeah,
enjoyable, the virtual one.
right, right. So let me pause you because I see what you're saying, which is the word homeschool evokes a lot of different things for different people.
Yeah.
And one version of it is a parent who simply watched their kid consume school during COVID that was
Mhm.
on a computer like this almost always say, that was bad.
Yeah.
That didn't work very well for us. And you're saying, no, no, no. I'm describing a kitchen table experience and a going out into our neighborhood, into our city, a very fulfilling social experience that is not bound by the computer screen. And so sometimes when we say the word homeschool, people imagine two very different situations. Is
Exactly.
that a fair summary of what you're
Yeah,
saying?
yeah, exactly. Everyone thinks it's you'll get the bell, it rings, and then the kids are connected, and yeah, that's definitely not the style that worked for us. So
Got it. So your husband, the former physicist, now doing whatever, curious creative guy says, listen, like we should rethink. Our kids are doing fine in school, but maybe they could do even better. So, in my language, I would say you're a vitamin parent versus an aspirin parent, meaning some homeschool moms are like, my kid is hating regular school. They need a solution. They're aspirin, they're
yeah,
solving a headache. I'm going to homeschool for that reason. You're a vitamin parent. You're like, my kids were fine in the regular school, but they're way better off with me. I'm enriching them. So
yeah.
you see this opportunity and you have a twin sister. Clue us in on what was her role here. How did you both end up getting going with homeschooling?
So she moved to Florida when during COVID actually, and they stayed with us in my house for the first few months until they found somewhere to live. Then the kids went to my kids' school and they started online as well. And then my niece was one of the first ones to go to, school in person. Because she was desperate to be, away from the computer and all that. And we started, and my sister was like, "Oh, this is a lot." Our schools also used to be our previous school. I still talk about it as it's still my school, but they are very, or at least back then, very into homework. And so it was always a lot of extra work after school. So they were in school for 7 hours, I don't know how long, and then they would have a lot of extra things to do. And my niece was pushing back on that a lot. And she was like, this is a lot of academic, pressure. And my kid came from, very playful pre-K to now very strict. She was in kindergarten, and she's like, all this work, it's for a 6-year-old or So she was like, thinking about it. She's like, it's a lot of work. And my husband's the first one. He's always saying, the kids are there too long. They need to be doing more sports. They're playing outside. We should travel more. They're gonna be learning, and we've always thought that, traveling, you're gonna be learning, observing from the world so much that it doesn't have to be in a classroom. So he's like, listen, I have a very flexible schedule. He works from home. He takes meetings when he's walking the dogs. He sits outside in the yard and takes works a little bit. Then he's always moving around, and he works and functions that way. And he's like, I'm very flexible. You're flexible. Why are we stuck to the kids' schedule? They don't have that much free time either because I never wanted to sacrifice their extracurriculars because I think their sports and their music, which they loved, was an integral part of them for them. And
Okay, let me pause you for one
mhm,
second and dig in. Like you've started your normal routine for the school year. You and your husband are often home. So with your 8 and 10-year-old, what's like if we just look at the instructional part of the day, we'll talk about the extracurricular
Mhm.
and enrichment in a little bit. When you want them to learn math or English or science or history, who's doing what? Like, walk us through a typical morning. What happens?
Okay, so we're very flexible in the sense that we don't have a strict, rigid schedule. But we've
Yep,
noticed that like mornings are usually it's when they're more alert and all that. My son, who's kind of like my husband, he opens his eyes and he jumps out of the bed. I mean, he's like wide awake, ready. Yeah. So at first, this has been a learning process also to see what motivates them and all. But I give them a list of things that they're supposed to do on their own. Right? So they do math. They decided they wanted to learn a second language because it was our first trip when we became homeschoolers. Was we went to Portugal and Spain for 3 weeks. So back then they decided they wanted to learn Portuguese, so that's still part of their curriculum. They do a little bit of Portuguese every day. They do math, independent reading, and they practice their music. That's what they're supposed to do on their own. And then they help with things in the house. And then we do certain things as a group. Me with them, let's either curricle, we do another like a reading aloud curriculum that we have and things like that. So currently the math curriculum that we're using it's called Beast Academy and it's on a browser. Have you heard of that one?
sure. Yep,
Uh,
Beast Academy, I'm quite
uh-huh.
familiar with.
So that
Yes.
one they can do it on their own pace. So what
Yep,
they start and he gets on the browser and does a lesson or two. He does a little bit. If he's stuck and the videos don't work, he tells me or my husband and we
yep.
go and help him with that. And
Are you and your husband, by the way, interchangeable in this? Or like how do the kids use the two of you as their teachers, if you will?
we are a little bit interchangeable, I would say. Like mostly throughout the day, I'm the one that's in charge of the extra activities that I don't mean extracurricular because actually my husband wants to go to those all the time. But like when we
Yep,
do surf skate science, it's usually me because that's in the middle of the day, or any morning activities, it's me doing it with them. Like the homeschooler activities we do together, but I also train sometimes in the morning. So my husband stays with them. I go, work out and he's there in the house. The kids go, he's like, Dad, I have a question with this. I can't figure out, and he'll help them and he'll do what's he started doing some projects with them of creating websites and doing a new business with them. So whenever I'm not home, he does those creative things with them.
I love it. And Andreina, on a scale of 1 to 10, if 10 is high, and listeners are curious about the autonomy, the independence of your 8 and 10-year-old, when it comes to when you ask them to do their math or you ask them to do their reading, how would you rate them just on their ability and willingness to just get started and grind through the academic work without much help from mom or dad? Is that fairly high, like a 9 out of 10, or is it medium, like 5 out of 10, or is it
Well,
low? Is it
depending on
different
the
by kid?
child. My 10-year-old,
Yes.
he's a little bit more motivated in certain
Yep.
aspects because I also my father-in-law has this saying that I'll translate it from Spanish, but it's basically every dog has their bone. And we have to figure out what motivates them to. So last year, my husband's like, listen, for Danny, he wants to have some screen time. I'm very strict about screen time at home. So he's like, he wants to have play Super Mario's on the Nintendo or play something in the iPad. And I used to tell them no until the weekend and very limited time. So it's like, what if we give them the list and we say, if you're done with all your responsibilities, you get 30 minutes of free play in the iPad. And then that's it. You turn it off, you go do your other free play and activities. So for him, there were days where he would wake up at 6:30 and he was, doing all his work and be like by 9, he's like, I'm done, mom. I did all my thing. Can I play a little bit? And I was like, I worked for him. Or my daughter's screen time wasn't that much of an incentive for her. She's like, she'll read a lot because she loves reading. She'll focus on the independent reading, but then she wouldn't do her math, or she'll only do math one day. Like she wouldn't do all her chores. So for her, it was more of a she loves chocolate. So like, listen, if you do to motivate her at first, because it was harder. We're like, if you do two of your tasks, then you can get one chocolate chip from the freezer. She's like, and then if you do two other, you'll get another one. So that was her motivation. But still, for her, it's a little bit harder to find, so she'll do a lot of, she'll open up a science box and do experiments on her own, or she'll do painting. But when I tell her you have to do math, like these certain things that you're supposed to do, she pushes a little bit more back on that. So then that's my
Well, and
struggle. I'm like, do I
I,
force the math, or I was like,
yep,
she's doing her own independent science, and
yep.
so I'm like, it's fine. So,
I think so. Here's how I'm hearing what you're saying, which I find so interesting. So, one of the opportunities of homeschooling, it cuts in as both as an advantage and a disadvantage. The advantage is from a motivation point of view. If your house is running pretty well, something you understand really well as a family therapist, if the household is running pretty well, you can customize the motivation to the individual, to the kid. So your son, here's what he likes, and you, as a family, you're already restrictive of screen time, so you can lighten it up a little bit. And as your father-in-law says, your son's bone, if you
yeah,
will, is Super Mario, and it's like it's fun, but it's not like a weird thing where you're rewarding him with like a million hours of screen
yeah,
time. It's just a little connection that helps make the learning feel a little bit more fun, help him persist through some of the stuff that's a little, maybe less his thing. Your daughter, you mentioned the chocolate. You can customize the motivation. So that's like a really good thing. A challenge that sometimes homeschool parents describe, and I'm curious if this even appears in your household. One advantage that the classroom teacher might have is the socialization sometimes is a motivation. In other words, if your son or daughter sees 20 other kids kind of starting on their assignments, there's a social conditioning to kind of going along with it. That's not
mhm,
true for all kids, and sometimes the classrooms get chaotic because of that, but that's sometimes an advantage that a teacher has is the group of 20 um, and the social component of motivation. Is that something that you notice in any way in your home of like how the lack of 20 other kids in the room around your kitchen table, how does it help? How does it hurt?
well, so that sometimes my sister comes with her kids, and we call it fam co-op, on the family co-op,
Yep.
and we get
So that's
together, yeah,
four kids.
four
Yeah.
kids too. And I noticed then that it's a lot of they get all excited and talking. Sometimes it's harder to get them to focus, right, on their own. But it's still, we do it. That's also limited. We do an hour or two of focused activity, and then they're free to play, and they're because they all they want to do is chat together. That was one of the issues with so my son in school, the teachers wrote always tell me he talks too much. I said, oh, he didn't. I said, no, no.
Yep.
And they would say, oh, he did all his work and he did it fine, but then he's done and he starts talking and gets the other kids distracted. So I said, like, well, but I'm like, I think I find it hard to be like, I'm not gonna ask him to just sit there quietly. I'm like, he did his work. I'm like, it's maybe it's too much time doing that, or the teacher will give him extra assignments. But then she's like, I don't want him to get, overwhelmed with too much assignments. But I was like, listen, it's okay for me. I get it. I'm like, I would be talking too if I was done with my activity. So he tends to do his work pretty efficient, and he's a fast learner, which has been an advantage here because he gets done quickly. But then he was always, yelled at by the teacher for talking or getting he couldn't socialize that much much as he wanted. Because in the classroom you're not supposed to be talking. In the cafeteria you're not supposed to be talking either. It's only during recess. So that's the social aspect that ends up being hindered, I feel, in school.
It's a common narrative among what I would call homeschooling vitamin parents, meaning their kid was academically strong in a traditional school setting, but they were also frequently bored. And I get it from the teacher point of view, like you're trying to navigate or orchestrate this group of 20 kids,
Yeah,
25 kids, whatever the case may be. But from the kids' point of view, you did the work. Now you got nothing to do, and the idea of like I'm just supposed to sit there is a really painful way to spend
yeah,
time. Parents notice that and they get a little bit of conflict with the teacher where they say, well, why can't you give a little bit of attention to my kid, give him or her more stuff to do that will be challenging and interesting,
Mhm.
then they won't end up talking. I can't just reduce the symptom of talking when they're bored. And I don't know that I really want to just tell them to sit there and shush. That doesn't feel appealing to me as a parent. So, what you're describing is a pretty common story. What about now that you're home? Do you feel like it's fairly easy for you to keep your son occupied with a good list of activities to do? Or do you sometimes feel like, ooh, now I'm the teacher, I gotta keep redirecting my one of my two kids?
Well, he tends to work well on his own too. So like I said, I
Yeah.
give him the list of things that he has there on the fridge and he knows that he does them. When he gets bored or when he wants to say, "Oh, I want more screen time," I don't know that now you have to. I think it's important for them to get bored in a way. Like I'm not gonna structure every activity. You have to figure out what you're gonna do now. Create a game with your sister, invent something, do whatever you need. That I think boredom leads to a lot of creativity. They still don't have that much as much free time as I would like. My husband's always telling me that I need to because every time I find a cool activity, I'm like, oh my God, let's do that. Oh, let's do this. So we have our schedule pretty booked. I have to really focus on scheduling the blank space on my calendar, like making sure they have downtime unstructured for them to get bored or create or do whatever it is they want. So that's the I don't do it the teacher wise, but we do a lot of activities together with a group of homeschoolers that we so that's the struggle in this sense.
Yes. So let me then turn our attention to these education savings
Mhm,
accounts. So you have roughly for each of your two children up to about $8,000 for education spending that the state of Florida, will reimburse your family for eligible expenditures. And I noticed three common stories, and I think I know yours, but I want to make sure I have it right. The common stories that we hear are one, some parents have kids with that are academically struggling, and so they're using that $8,000 a lot towards specialists and special
mhm,
needs type services. So that's one type. A second type is essentially buying access to a micro school with 6 kids, 10 kids, 12 kids, something that a few times a week they can go to with a reliable teacher
mhm,
where they're getting a social and learning experience. That's a second type. And a third type is spending most of the $8,000 on enrichment experiences for their kids. In other words, mom typically or mom and dad do a lot of the instruction, math, English, science,
mhm.
history. They buy a little curriculum here and there, but what they're really doing is unlocking some very high quality enrichment experiences. I think that's the story of your homeschool. Tell us about that. How are you spending the education savings account this coming year?
Okay, so the biggest ticket items that we have are their sports. So they train jujitsu and they're in the competition team as well. So it's like two memberships that we pay monthly for each. So four memberships for that. And they also do School of Rock, and it's that one's a big ticket, and they're both in it. So that also adds up. I think those two take up the most. And we do the surf skate science. That's our science curriculum right there. And that we do that in twice a year, 2 semesters. So those are the
I
biggest
love it.
ones.
So let's talk about the School of Rock, or the what instruments are they learning, and what's that experience been like?
So the way their program works is they have an individual class, a private class with whatever instrument. So my son does his main instrument is drums, but he's doing drums or bass, and my daughter does keys and vocals. So they have a 45-minute lesson with a teacher, a private one, and then they have a group lesson every week. It's like 2.5 hours with the whole band. So every week the band practices like they're not inside playing the instrument for 2.5 hours, but they're there for 2.5 hours and they go into the rehearsal room every time they have a song and they pick up new instruments. So that's it's time consuming, but also they it's a really cool program because they also let them and they encourage them to pick up new instruments and new songs that are really want. So in that band, they're like, listen, that's how my son started playing bass now. That's another one of his biggest instruments. They said, you want to learn? Here, grab it, figure it out, and then they'll start teaching them now he wants to pick up a third instrument, but like I said, we're actually going through the savings account to see if I can add another private class of an instrument to see if I can afford it. But only if with the education savings account I would be able to afford an additional instrument.
Got it. So you're doing this great. By the way, I think at most elementary schools, they do not have bass guitar typically. Um, they often don't have keyboards. They have sort of the traditional, if you will, orchestra type,
Hmm.
so you got your string instruments and your brass
Hmm.
instruments and so forth. So this is a little bit hipper,
Yeah.
the rock music. Um, by the way, as a mom, you're very brave to allow your kids to learn drums. Has a big impact on the home.
Oh yeah.
When they're practicing like crazy, the bass is a little more controlled. Put on the headphones. It's so cool. So they're developing a love of music. They're performing. They're at a school that is, different from some of the old school. Like my daughter did some School of
Hmm.
Rock, and I was pretty impressed with how quickly they try to get into
Oh
performance.
yeah. It's performance
The
based. The whole.
that how the we're going to make your anxiety go away by putting you up on a stage pretty quickly.
Even if you're a month
Um,
in, if the show comes on, yeah,
a
get on,
month
get it,
in,
course.
yeah, and they're very clever in how they do that. Jujitsu. Both our kids did the local martial arts program coming growing up, and I felt like not just as a physical thing, but as a character development. It was a husband and wife team doing incredible quality teaching. And I wondered what your jujitsu experience has been for your kids on not just the physical component of it, but as a mom, how do you process what else they're getting out of that?
Well, my son was the one that started first jujitsu. He loves it, and I feel that it gives him a lot of confidence. Also, it's different than other group sports. I feel like they each have their advantage, group sports versus individual sports. But this one, they compete in this one too, like I mentioned. There's there's an aspect of accountability that it's just you when you go and compete. If you didn't, you sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. It happens, but it's on you. You can't blame your teammate. You can't blame the goalie or oh, we lost because, which I've noticed in a lot of the team sports, they tend to like place the blame on someone else. This one, it's a lot of, well, my son comes out, he's like, I lost this one. And he's like, Mom, I need to train harder because I want to beat him in the next competition. He knows it's on him. And then I think that's a huge aspect. Also, besides just the competing aspect, I think it's a big mental and emotional growth. It's a roller coaster of emotions. And sometimes you lose. And then you have to get your stuff together and then go back into the mat and fight even when you're carrying that no you lost but you have it's a new fight. You're starting from scratch and not let your head get in the way. So that part I feel like it's been huge for them. For my daughter, she loves it as well. For her, I after I talked to a friend who also had a daughter, her daughter didn't like it, but she's like it's she doesn't have she's like I want her to know how to defend herself because the time comes that she goes to college. My daughter's also on the smaller side. I was like I want to make sure that you can take care of yourself. If something happens you can defend yourself. You're not you know hoping that someone's there in the moment to protect you. So hopefully that'll never happen, but also I think that projects, they're confident, they know how to. I think that's been a huge aspect for me.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I've definitely reached the level with our 14-year-old daughter where I feel so much more secure because and I know this from when occasionally she'll practice for a belt test with me as the dummy. And she'll be like, Dad, pretend you're doing this. And then she'll hurt me. And, like, ha! And, it's such a nice feeling as a parent to have that. not just for your kid's self-confidence, but your own confidence that when, your kid grows up and ends up far away, that they can handle themselves.
Yeah.
It's a great thing. Um, you're in the unusual. You have a twin and who's also homeschooling. Uh, what's it like with your sister? Tell us a little bit about that. Do you compare notes? Are you critiquing each other's homeschool at all? How do you work together, or what's that partnership and relationship like as it pertains to the homeschooling?
So it's been very supportive in a way. And it's since we both took the plunge at the same time, it was also good to know that, I'm not alone in this, right? We would do it together and separately. So usually we each do it on our own. Then we get together, we try to do it once a week or once every other week, the family co-op to do whatever theme the kids are into. Like last year, they were really into Greek mythology. So we would just get together to learn about Greek mythology and do projects like that. But the rest of our homeschooling, we do separately because all kids have very different styles. Her oldest daughter is also his she's my youngest daughter's age, and the other one's a little bit younger. So there are different um, grades each, but also they have different learning styles. So that part we've done separately, but whatever I'm having, let's say a crisis moment or something, I call and she calms me down. Whenever she's having a crisis moment, it's a good way to take a step back and remember, like, okay, what's your goal in doing this? Is it really that you want her to do this task, or do you want independence? So it helps us look at it from afar. So that's been a really big help. We've also have a big homeschool community that we've been part of, and they help a lot whenever you have those freak out moments that, oh my God, what if I'm ruining my kids? What if this is a,
Yes.
and then you realize,
I th-
okay,
I think it's interesting of what you have. So I think, if you look at all teachers, whether they're in a school or they're homeschooling, they're looking for a few different things. At most basic level, it's reassurance.
mhm,
Like people question themselves, how am I doing? And it seems to me like in the homeschool community, people get that both through Facebook type groups from strangers sometimes. And I see as I look across all the states at the different Facebook pages how common that is. And then they get it from the handful of people that they know or know in person. And, they have those types of exchanges. But you have a really nice thing by having a twin who is obviously the aunt to your son and
mhm,
daughter, and vice versa. You really know the kids well and not just the homeschool teacher, meaning you
yeah,
and your twin. And so it allows you to have a very unusual level of depth of understanding because, you have your own observations
yeah,
as the non-parent but the loving aunt to her children and vice versa. So I think that's really a cool thing. It's one thing I don't yet see a lot in the homeschool community. I see a ton of asking questions about curriculum, about strategy. How would you engage a kid who's sort of
mhm,
resisting this or that? I don't yet see, although maybe I'm missing it, a lot of peer observation of somebody yet saying, look, I want to turn on the Zoom on our kitchen table and have a trusted person watch me interact with my kids for 15 minutes. That is a common thing in many schools where the teacher gets observed and can get feedback on how to do better. I don't yet see that in the homeschooling, and I think you almost automatically have that built in with your twin sister.
yeah. It's been that's because even though we're twins, in this aspect, like my sister is very academic, and she was, I
Yeah.
will like, we have videos of us in a vacation in the Virgin Islands, and we're all swimming, and my sister's like reading a book and kissing a book, and it's her thing. I making fun of her, like she loves that, and she did her PhD, and she's very, so for her, it's been, she's, when we decided to do homeschooling, she read 10 books on homeschooling and the whole thing. She's like my encyclopedia in that sense, but I'm the one that also tells her, like, it's okay, things will work out. So she is
Yeah.
very like, very squared in that sense. And she's like, this is my struggle. I have to remember because one of her daughters is not that way at all. I was like, she could be more my daughter than your daughter.
Yeah.
I was like, you're right. Maybe that's not her style, and it's okay. And then she's like, yeah, that's right. I can't, she's not me. I have to realize that her style of learning is different, and so that's what helps a lot. Whenever she has a moment, she's like, oh my gosh, maybe try it a different way. She's more of an artist, so try this, and then she's this is what homeschooling is great because you have the flexibility to switch halfway. You don't have to wait until the school year ends to switch a curriculum. You can say, well, maybe this math program is not working for her. Maybe let's try this one, and but it's a learning curve for us too, because I was more of a finisher as well. Like we start this book, we finish this book. I'm like, yeah, but if they're pushing back so much, maybe toss the book, put it aside, and then try a new thing. So that's what
I love
it's helped. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I love it because what you're describing, the not just the mutual support that you have, but we can finish on this topic. All teachers always have to make a million decisions. There's so many interlocking questions. Oh, we started this. The kid's not into it. Do I press through? Maybe that sends the wrong signal.
Yeah.
There's a million interlocking
And they
decisions.
have 20 something
And,
kids. Maybe it's clicking with
and
some, but not the others.
that's right. And so, what homeschooling has done for you is reduce it to a universe of decision making that at least it's less. It allows you to be more present intellectually, emotionally, and less having your working memory trying to keep track of, 20 kids all
Yeah.
squirming around in a slightly different way. I love that. Listen, here's what we should do. Let's leave it here for today. This has been Homeschooling Journeys with Curious Mike, hearing Andreina Castillo Alemani's story from Florida. Andreina, thank you so much for sharing about your homeschooling journey.
Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.